Surprises come in all shapes and sizes, especially in the video game industry. Usually they come in the form of a game we might have been hesitant about at first, but became pleasantly entertained by once we give it a chance. But sometimes, a surprise comes in the form of a game we never knew we wanted at all until it was announced. Even more surprising are games that are released on the very day they're first revealed to the world. These are called shadow drops, or stealth drops, and on rare occasions, they hit hard. One of the most successful shadow drops of all time was Apex Legends. It came out of nowhere and took the increasingly saturated battle royale market by storm to the point where it's now one of the few left standing tall. It's difficult for just any old developer to pull off a successful shadow drop. They need fame, talent, and above all else, the game itself needs to look promising. Enter Tango Gameworks, the studio formed in 2010 by former Capcom and Platinum Games director and producer Shinji Mikami. The team is known for the Evil Within duology and the recently released Ghostwire Tokyo. In fact, those are the only big titles they have made to date. Until now. On January 25th of this year, mere days ago, Xbox hosted a developer direct where Tango's new game, Hi-Fi Rush, was not only announced, but released. The Tango Gameworks team features individuals whose careers span a respectable history of high-profile action games. There are people in the studio today who worked on Bayonetta, Vanquish, Okami, Beautiful Joe, Devil May Cry, and God Hand. So, to hear that these incredible developers created not only a new action game, but a rhythm action game at that, was pretty big news. For every devout lover of hardcore action games, hearing that these people were returning to their roots is something huge. And the hype, as quickly as it appeared, turned out to be more than justified. As a big fan of many of those action franchises, I had to try Hi-Fi Rush for myself. So I played it, I beat it, and now I want to talk about it. So let's dive into the review. Hi-Fi Rush is about a young man named Chai who visits the Vandalay Technologies campus to have his right arm replaced with a robotic one as a test subject for the corporation's cybernetic limb replacement services. Chai is a very airheaded young man who dreams of being a rock star, and is always seen with his music player on his person. But when his limb replacement procedure goes wrong and his music player is embedded into his chest in a freak accident, music begins to completely overtake his perception of the world around him. Vandalay Technologies begins hunting him down after labeling him a defect, and he must defend himself by utilizing the power of his new arm, the player in his chest, and his magnetized grabbing stick that transforms into a makeshift guitar. On his way out of the campus, he meets a robotic cat named 808 and its owner, Peppermint, an anti-Vandalay hacker who seeks to take the corporation's seedy leaders down. Together they must break into the various sectors of Vandalay's headquarters and unlock secrets pertaining to an AI program that might allow the company to use its cybernetic augmentations as a way of mind-controlling the population. Chai has to fight the bosses of each sector and maybe meet some other allies along the way. Hi-Fi Rush has an extremely colorful and lively setting with characters to match. Every member of the cast is bursting at the seams with personality and spunk. Their designs are distinctive and recognizable, as are their voices and demeanors. Chai, as a main character, is an airheaded loser. He's a fool, an idiot, and kind of a deadbeat. And yet I don't think I would prefer him any other way. He doesn't care about logical choices as much as he cares about doing the thing that looks cool. And for a game like this, that's the ideal mindset for a main character to have. He matches his world perfectly, and he stands out among all the other characters who actually know what's going on. He's out of his element almost the entire time, and yet his confidence is still infectious. Peppermint is also a great teammate, being the much smarter individual who has to tolerate him throughout the mission. The 6 bosses of Vandalay are also very strong personalities, with people like Rekka, the third-person speaking head of production with a pro wrestling motif, and Zanzo, the JoJo-posing head of research and development. The world of Vandalay Technologies is pulsing with rhythm as you play, and the game makes use of its vibrant colors and extremely busy environments to create a setting that's simply bursting with life. And that's not in spite of the fact that the world is inhabited mostly by robots either. Even the unimportant metallic staff members of the company provide a kind of charm and sense of humor that only helps to elevate the narrative aspect of the experience. Idle chatter, funny animations, and even text logs scattered around the levels all add greater nuance to the writing side of the game and gives the world just as much personality as the actual main characters. Graphically, the game has a pretty straightforward and simplistic, cel-shaded aesthetic that we've all seen before, but where it shines is the tiny flourishes and special effects that pop up on occasion that resemble those we see in actual cartoons and comic books. I find it pretty reminiscent of the movie Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, but on a much greater scale because it's happening in real time in a video game. It's helped even further by the aforementioned bright palette of colors and asset-dense environments that make the highly stylized and varied levels feel like real places. An immense amount of effort was clearly put into the visuals of the game. Sometimes, cheap, cel-shaded graphics are used merely as a cost-saving technique, but Hi-Fi Rush is anything but, and commits to the style fully and brings out a level of visual charisma that isn't seen every day. Tango Gameworks did an excellent job at mimicking a 2D art style while still playing in 3D, and that's not even to mention the fact that the game actually does have traditional 2D animated cutscenes once in a while, that seamlessly transition in and out of gameplay. It is truly astounding. In regard to performance, the game doesn't have multiple modes like a lot of other games do, and that's good. As not only an action game but also a rhythm game, there should not be an option to run the game at 30 frames per second. Native 4K and 60 FPS is where this game should be, and thankfully it's where it stays practically 100% of the time. I didn't notice any particularly bad slowdowns, so even if they did exist in my playthrough, they weren't obvious enough for me to care. Because the game's art direction is so cartoonish, there's little in the way of super high-fidelity detail going on here, so as you might expect, graphical options on consoles are understandably sparse. However, the game has a lot of accessibility options, which is great for a rhythm game. There's your regular subtitle options like font size, speaker name, subtitle background, and environmental or context subtitles. And there's a colorblind mode to help people hit notes better. There's even an auto-action mode that allows you to perform all actions as long as you simply hit any attack on beat, and a single button rhythm game option that lets you do all the brief rhythm minigames in Hi-Fi Rush with just the X button on the Xbox controller. And of course, there's different settings for rhythm visualization for your little cat buddy 808, who pulsates to the beat to help you out with timing. This is just a taste of how the game works to help you stay with the rhythm of the music. Hi-Fi Rush is bordering on obsessive with how it does everything it possibly can to keep you on beat. The HUD pulses to the beat, environmental assets shake and move to the beat, Chai himself walks and runs to the beat, and when he stands, he's snapping his fingers and tapping his feet to the beat. Enemies attack to the beat, and if all of that is still not enough, you can press the menu button and a metronome appears at the bottom of the screen. And this is still before the more lax timing you can get on easier difficulties. Hi-Fi Rush puts every reasonable effort into giving you as many visual cues as possible as to when you're supposed to hit those buttons. If you still can't stay on rhythm after all of this help, I'm afraid you're probably a lost cause. Or your setup is suffering from an immense amount of input lag, which, surprisingly, the game cannot help with. It's a bit strange that there's no calibration setting that lets you place your own set amount of input latency, but considering how many hundreds, maybe thousands of little animations are tied to the beat Tango set for you, it's understandable. You'll just have to make sure your TV is set to game mode. Regardless, you'll still need an oppressive amount of lag for it to actually negatively affect anything, especially on easier difficulties. Beyond all that, there's one big setting that was included for a specific group of people: streamer mode. By enabling streamer mode, all the licensed music in the game is disabled. This might sound worrying at first because some other games that have this just replace the music with inferior, legally distinct versions, or in the worst case, silence. However, Hi-Fi Rush instead replaces the licensed music with excellent original compositions that perfectly fit the mood, tone, and style of the game. The original score is so good that I've seen debates online about whether the game is better with streamer mode or not, even if you're not a streamer who needs to use it. After everything the game does to help you stay on beat, this is the detail that truly shows off how much thought, care, and passion Tango Gameworks put into this title. They didn't make an action game and just slap the rhythm aspect onto it haphazardly like a cheap gimmick or an afterthought. Music is the game's identity, and it's obvious this was the case even when it was just a twinkle in the team lead's eyes. So if you want to stream the game, you don't have to live in fear of a worse experience by enabling this mode. In fact, you might be getting a superior experience instead, depending on who you ask. Now it's time for the main attraction, the headliner, the gameplay. I mentioned before that the team who worked on Hi-Fi Rush have experience in older action games like Bayonetta, Vanquish, Devil May Cry, Beautiful Joe, and God Hand, and boy does it show here. Hi-Fi Rush isn't just a fun rhythm combat game, it's a genuine character action spectacle with depth and tech. Light attack, heavy attack, dash, double jump, snatch, parry, and multiple different assists. The game has all the awesome staple mechanics of the best action games of the years gone by. And they all come together to create an open-ended game that would still be incredible to play even if the rhythm aspect didn't exist. The game is simple enough for people with no character action experience whatsoever to find pleasure in by simply hitting buttons and watching cool stuff happen. But there's enough mechanical nuance for hardcore fans of the genre to string some really impressive sequences together. Parrying is sometimes a defensive function that people tend to ignore in favor of dodging, typically because dodging is a safer response that's harder to screw up. But Hi-Fi Rush makes parrying a very rewarding mechanic that's worth practicing. Not only because it can score you some big combo opportunities, but because there are sections of mandatory parrying scattered throughout the game. You've heard me mention assists a couple times already, but to expand on that, assists from different characters have specific uses in battle, and while they all have utility on any enemy, they're mostly used for specific types. For example, force-fielded enemies require you to summon an assist from Peppermint, who will shoot the protective barrier off. Heavily shielded enemies require a different assist to destroy said shields, etc. And these enemies are color-coded to make their respective assists more obvious at a glance. Usually, color-coding enemies in a character action game ends up feeling cumbersome and antithetical to the usual combative freedom they boast. But Hi-Fi Rush does a really good job at making the system feel more natural with the experience. Probably because you're expected to summon assists in tandem with performing regular attacks. You don't have to stop your attacks to call forth an assist. You can do them both at the same time. It's way less frustrating than other attempts made by other games. All the combat mechanics just feel satisfying to use. They're effective, reliable, and stylish. The mere feeling the game has when your hands are on the controller and you're zipping around with the magnet or bashing enemies into scrap is just immensely fulfilling. An interesting detail is that when you begin an attack, no matter how offbeat you are, the attack itself will still come out on beat. So technically the game is still playable if you can't stay on beat to save your life. But your attacks do more damage and combos are much smoother if you time it right. You'll be able to cancel out of animations into others too. So while you can bumble your way through the game without a modicum of rhythm, you're incentivized to learn how to do it properly. Of course, combos aren't limited to just one light and one heavy. As with all other action games, you can purchase new combos to expand your options and even gain new, minor mechanics like parry counters. The game's shop is actually a bright spot in the experience because of how incredibly user-friendly it is. When you browse for new moves, you're given not just a description of what the move does and how to do it, but you're also given a small video example you can blow up to full screen, with sound, to get a better idea. There's a training room to test your new moves out too. And even more, if you decide that you don't want the move, you can sell it back for 90% of the cost, functioning a lot like Devil May Cry 4's Proud Souls. The only way the shop would be better is if you could test the move before buying it, but as it stands, it's probably the best shop in the whole character action genre. One particular aspect of these types of games that is always being discussed is level design. The size, complexity, and mobility required to get around levels can vary a drastic amount. You can have something like Devil May Cry 5, which is so focused on the combat that level design is very bare bones, making missions a series of hallways for walking through and then boxes for fighting in. It's not an inherently bad decision, it's just the game playing to its strengths. Sometimes a game attempts a more complicated level design, but completely fails to implement it in a way that lends itself toward the game's best and most fun mechanics. Bayonetta 3 got some flack for some levels being huge infinite voids, despite there being nothing of substance to offer in that vast space. Hi-Fi Rush comes along and gives us possibly the most ideal character action level design we've seen in years. Linear paths, but with small, frequent side routes that lead to secrets and collectibles, and regular but short and sweet platforming or minigame sections that don't bog down the second-to-second experience by feeling poorly implemented or like chores you need to tolerate to make progress. Sometimes you enter a side-scrolling section focused more on platforming, and those are short, fun little diversions too. Rhythm-based minigames are everywhere here, even in fights, and they work in slightly different ways. The snatch mechanic, essentially a grappling hook, is used not only to pull yourself towards enemies in battle, but also to zip around the environment and engage in brief but cool rail sliding sections. One of the types of mid-battle minigames is parrying. The enemy presents a series of attacks that you must respond to with a parry, or in some rare cases, a dodge. They come out in a specific number and with a specific rhythm that you have to match in order to parry or dodge everything. Hi-Fi Rush is loaded with these charming and fun micro-interactions that add more style to the experience. They never feel intrusive or like wastes of time. I never began a minigame and groaned because I knew I was in for some annoying bullshit. Not once. Platinum Games could learn a thing or two from this. Hi-Fi Rush isn't only rewarding in combat either, it's rewarding in the literal sense. There's a wall of fame that features a huge mural with hundreds of tiny sections that fill in as you accomplish a ton of different goals as you play. And each goal gives you gears, circuits, and more to spend on unlockables. And unlockables are a huge part of the game. One thing Hi-Fi Rush clearly surpasses its contemporaries on is customization, both mechanically and visually. Remember the plug-in chip system in Nier Automata? A version of that is here too. You can buy different chips with a ton of useful effects, level them to increase their effectiveness, and equip them. They range anywhere from lowering the cooldown time of your assists, to increasing your score, to increasing the distance you can pull items in, and much more. Action games also typically have multiple costumes for its characters. They're a fun way to add a little bit of spice to the experience, but this rhythm-based slasher actually has a full-on dress-up screen so you can give Chai a new look piece by piece from head to toe. You can alter his hair, shirt, jacket, pants, boots, and even his robotic arm. It's usually a ton of work to implement this much customization on a character's appearance in these games, but the game's art direction and low poly count for character models allows it to get away with so many more options than other games in the genre. And Chai isn't the only person you can customize too. You can give adorable costumes to 808, and even to your partners in crime you summon into battle. But the awesome extra content still doesn't stop there. Once you beat the game, you're finally able to go back and play through all missions using techniques and powers you didn't have before to access new areas and even more goodies. You're also able to play missions on all other difficulties to strive for a screen of all S's. Speaking of difficulties, you also unlock Rhythm Master, a challenge even harder than very hard, because if you allow your rank in the top right corner of the screen to hit D, it's an instant game over. So it's not just about surviving hard-hitting enemies anymore, it's about never making enough mistakes in general to let that meter slip down. And the last and most awesome unlockable is Rhythm Tower, a challenge room with many floors that require you to beat enemies within a time limit before you can move on to the next. It's exactly like Bloody Palace in the Devil May Cry series. Basically, Hi-Fi Rush just throws content at you, and it's all fun to partake in. From new challenges to new drip, there's a ton of rewards to work for. Overall, Hi-Fi Rush is a shadow-dropped gem, a diamond in a genre that really needed one, especially since the prior high-profile release was seen as a disappointment to many. Tango Gameworks shows us that their character action spirit has not only never died out, but burns brighter than ever before, as if it were a dam waiting to burst. Hi-Fi Rush oozes with personality and style, and showcases a love for other action games by utilizing mechanics from its predecessors and peers, and for games in general through clever and amusing references scattered throughout the game. And what's more, this game is only $30 US, $40 if you get the deluxe edition. Knowing how good this game is, I would have gladly paid double that for such an entertaining and charming experience that I feel I only get once in a blue moon, and in a genre that's starving for more choice. It's a surprise hit that no one knew they wanted until it was unleashed upon the world as a pleasant reminder of what the experienced talent behind previous stars such as God Hand, Devil May Cry, Vanquish, Okami, and Beautiful Joe could do. And I hope it's a sign of more badass rhythm action coming from Tango in the future. This concludes my review of Hi-Fi Rush. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you around.